Hi, Gregg Perry again. You're welcome to my restoration studio. We're going to expand a little bit about the Beaux Arts, particularly in Paris. In Paris and in London in the 18th century, much of the furniture, the period furniture, the high quality furniture was decorated in the chinoiserie style, the Chinese or Asian styles. And it started and evolved into using what is called Urushi Lacquer. Urushi Lacquer comes from the sumac tree. The sumac tree is the same type of sumac that we get poison here, but it's basically a bush or ground growing variety. And in the Asian countries, the sumac trees can come up to 4-foot diameter. They're huge. And when the tree gets to be about 2 to 2.5 feet in diameter, they actually spigot the tree. And once a year, they will actually take out the sap. And the sap is highly toxic as far as giving yourself poison. But at the same time, it has been used since the 14th century to put a clear protected layer on things, okay, on furniture and other objects of art. If the Urushi lacquer is not purified, it goes on clear, and when it dries to black. So in the 18th century, traditional, real Asian black lacquering was done with Urushi lacquering. Unfortunately, through the 18th century, there were probably thousands, tens of thousands of artists who died. They didn't know why they were dying. But if you get a drop of the sap on your hand, it's probably 10 to 20 times more toxic than our ground sumac here. I was working with a Vietnamese artist a few years ago, and a few drops mixed with water, and I soon had half my body covered with poison. So you have to be very careful. Long gloves, face protection. Even when you're doing this on a restoration basis, if this is rehydrated, it will cause poison. It could be sitting for 200 years. And if we were to go and sand this panel, if this panel is 200 years old, we'd sand it, create a slurry with water, and get some on our skin. Instantaneously, we're going to get poison. Okay? So we must be very, very careful. Today, I buy it in tubes, 6-ounce tubes from Japan and from China, depending on the quality I'm looking for the restoration. And it dries totally opposite of any other finish we know or work with in traditional woodworking. It dries in wet environments. You want to dry it or cure it in a very humid room, a room with almost 100% humidity, and at times water flowing down it. That is how it dries, because it needs to dry from the inside out. Otherwise, if it's drying in a typical ambient type air situation, the outside is going to dry too quickly, and it's going to become brittle and crack. So we want to dry slowly from the inside out by maintaining the exterior of the surface to be wet all the time. So here is a 18th century clock, an English clock from the 1770s. When I purchased it in California, it came east and it had no door. So here's the door I created using an old piece of wood. And I used the Urushi lacquer techniques. First, I laid down the clear Urushi lacquer. I went through the drying process, which is actually a wet process. Once dried, I used gesso, plaster of Paris, just like we did in our gilding video, to do all the raising, the trees, the motifs, the pagodas, anything that was raised, sculpting it on very lightly onto the dark black background now since it's dried. And then after that, I gild over using gilding powders, 23, 20, 18 karat gold, and a little bit of gold leaf. And I tend to scratch through the powders into the black hardened Urushi lacquer to get the finite details through. So this is one, and my clock was also missing columns. So here is, I turned the column on the lathe, and I went through the same process. Base of the Urushi lacquer, it was clear, turned black, gesso raisings, sculpting the gesso, and then applying the gold leaf. So come out and see. You'll see this store, and you'll see these columns on Arts and Bloom weekend at 68 North Main Street, Site 22. Thanks for coming by.